Hello, this is Rudy Giuliani, and welcome to Rudy's Common Sense. Another episode, and this episode is going to be devoted to the almost can call it a war. Of course, it's hopefully it's a peaceful war, but a war between the parents and the school board. So the parents and the activists, really, with the school boards either being captured or not being captured by the left-wing activists, and it turns on the education of their children. Education on the traditional subjects, which by every measure, when you compare us to other countries, is slipping badly, at least with regard to public education. And then the traditional subjects that have been removed and the new subjects that now appear to be on the horizon, different forms of critical race theory, which might be under different names and denied as critical race theory, but actually take place. And then sex and gender identification education, which I think most parents didn't even realize was going on. A lot of this came about because of the pandemic, with people at home, children getting at-home instructions, parents picking it up and being shocked, as I would be if I had children of that age, or parents or children just coming home and telling them what teacher said to them. Teacher said white people are all racist, or teacher said that Abraham Lincoln was really a bad man. So many different things encompassed in this. But as you know, what's happened is it's broken out in these debates, heated, at school boards, and extraordinary act. The president and the attorney general and the Biden administration has declared there's going to be an area of federal enforcement. Hard for me as a former federal prosecutor to figure out what laws they're going to use. There are no federal laws here. But this is so important to them as part of their agenda that they're frightening everyone with, this is a federal case. And we have with us John Saylor, who has over this summer and before written very, very cogent articles on this subject. Articles that are well balanced, and most importantly, articles that are accessible. And I thought it would be useful for all of us who are going to be facing this issue for some time to hear from John. So John, how are you?
Doing great, thanks. How are you?
Good. Welcome to Rudy's Common Sense. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And the articles that I mentioned we'll get to in a moment. But right now, you're a member of the National Association of Scholars. I saw the press release on June 1st of 2021. Tell us your background, before that, and then we'll get to that.
So I am a former teacher. I've taught at charter schools, Christian schools from everywhere between Harlem and rural North Carolina. So I have a background working in K through 12 education, but I'm also very interested in public policy, which is why I eventually signed on to become a research associate here at the National Association of Scholars, which is why you find me writing these articles today.
So now, what motivated you? I mean, there's so much you could. Your bailiwick is so large. How did you come to focus on the current issues about, let's call it controversial educational programs, whether they be critical race theory or gender or sex education, or versions of the 1619 Project?
Well, I think it's one of the key issues of our day. And I think it's that way because there are a lot of organizations, a lot of people in power who adopt what amounts to an orthodoxy, certain views that they think you should not be able to disagree with. And I find many of those views to be damaging to children and to our country.
Now, how long has this been going on without our, as a society, really knowing it? Or let's say it was confined to a very small group of people, because it seems to have broken out now to the whole of society. But this has been going on for some time. I'm almost going to say below the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that there are sort of two waves of this movement. On one hand, A lot of it arose from the universities becoming more and more ideologically charged, which of course is a big focus of the National Association of Scholars. And as the universities have become more ideologically charged, education schools in particular have trained teachers and people with really sterling credentials to think in this way, to treat these wild ideas about gender or about racializing ideologies as unquestionably true. And so you start seeing organizations like Gender Spectrum kind of come into being and become prominent in the early 2010s. Although the ideology that informs Gender Spectrum and the ideology that informs the new movement toward, uh, for instance, activist civics, that's been going on for a lot longer than that. You know, these ideologies, for instance, critical race theory, can be traced back to the 1980s and 90s. I would say that was the first wave where it was happening sort of under the radar, but a significant amount of change, it was really hard to overstate this, occurred in the summer of 2020. So the reason I know so much about this organization, Gender Spectrum, is because I've done a lot of research on private schools and the way that the top private schools in the country, the ones that you've probably heard of, have all issued massive institutional changes that touch every part of the curriculum to change their institutions uh, to carry out diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And not only, I discovered that it's not just private schools doing this. It's not just private schools totally overhauling their institutions. It's school boards.
Well, you know,
It's
the interesting,
nonprofit.
if I may just interrupt for a minute, John, it's interesting because I think most people, until your articles and a few things that happened here in New York with private schools, most people thought of this as a public school problem.
Mm-hmm.
And until recently, I mean, schools have been an issue. I was the mayor between 1994 and 2001. And schools were an issue then because of lack of performance, because of comparisons where we were slipping to third and fourth and fifth and sixth. Now we're somewhere in the 20s or 30s with math, English, the basic subjects. And parents, aware parents, were very upset about it. And there was as early as 1988, 1989, there was a big debate here in New York about daddy has, or Sonny has two mommies and Johnny has two daddies. And there was a big debate about whether it should be taught, whether there should be parental consent, whether there should be parental opt-out, should it be consent, opt-out, or nothing. So those debates go back some time, but they seem mild now they seem very mild compared to what happened. But what you're saying is it started in the universities and then it became part of the schools. Has this agenda been introduced in the public schools before it was introduced in the private schools? We'll take a short break. Big tech monitors us, censors us, deplatforms us. Conservatives have been helpless to do anything about it until now. On Gettr, you can talk with friends and family and express your political beliefs without fear of Silicon Valley liberals coming after you. Join Gettr, the social media platform that supports free speech and opposes cancel culture. Gettr is led by former Trump advisor Jason Miller, who saw what big tech did to President Trump and decided to fight back. Gettr is the fastest growing social media platform in history, with over 1.6 million users and growing, including prominent conservatives like Mike Pompeo, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Steve Bannon. Join Gettr. It's in the App Store, the Google Play Store, and at Gettr.com. Longer posts, longer videos, sharper and clearer pictures, and unlike the Silicon Valley oligarchs, Gettr will never sell your data. Send a message today, join Gettr. It's time to cancel culture. Thank you for returning.
I think that both kinds of institutions have sort of followed the same timeline. So you start to see them taking a much more explicit stand for these kinds of things, especially in 2020, but really it's been happening for a couple of years. So you see private schools uh, using Gender Spectrum, the organization that I wrote about, for training, for professional development, using the resources as a guide to how their schools operate. But you also see public schools doing that. But their mission, if you look at the institutions, are often very clear. Their mission, the mission of Gender Spectrum, is to teach children that gender is non-binary and to make sure that that kind of training shows up in school curricula all over the country, and primarily public schools.
How would we define the sort of the basket of programs that are at issue here? Maybe not all of them in every single school district or private school, but sort of the basic. It seems to me it's in part race, in part history, which also relates to race, and then we have gender and sex education, and they seem to be part of the same package. And interestingly, if you read the Black Lives Matter literature, they're very much part of the same package. When you look at what they want to achieve, almost everything you're talking about is in that Marxist literature of Patrice Cullors. And so how would you define this basket of things that they're trying to have in the public or private school curriculum? And who is they? Who's doing this?
So I would say broadly, they would be, the vast sweep of elite college-educated professionals who buy into what their education and training has taught them. But specifically, they might be organizations that do professional development or activist organizations. If you want a succinct definition of what it is they're going for, some people call it social justice ideology. Some people call it critical race theory or critical theory in general. It goes under a lot of names. One person calls it the successor ideology, the ideology that comes after liberalism. So that means that everything from gender to even civics education is looked at through this lens of oppression and oppressor, through the lens of these identity categories, especially race, class, gender, sexual orientation. And so what we're seeing is an outsized focus on these things. Of course, nobody wants to ignore America's history with race, but that's not what these people are really proposing. Just look at America's history with race. Rather, they're proposing that we look at virtually everything through the lens not only of race, only of class, gender identity, but also separate people out into either allies or oppressors. And that's what I think is really pernicious about all of this.
So there are groups, a number of them, like Gender Spectrum, that are quite involved in programs like this. But is Gender Spectrum one of the larger and one of the bigger ones?
Gender Spectrum is unique because they are the primary organization pushing forward what I call gender ideology. So they go into schools and they tell fifth grade teachers to teach their fifth grade classes that gender is non-binary, and then tell their students to chart themselves on 3 different gender spectrum charts: sex, gender expression, gender identity. This is deeply confusing material. And so they are by far the largest organization that does this in schools.
So you describe in your article something I think that's very graphic and very useful for people to understand this. You say in one particular classroom, one of the teachers teaching this put up on the whiteboard 3 circles, and in the circles they had tell me exactly the categories in each of the circles.
Yeah, so it was a line, a straight line, 3 straight lines, and on those lines they marked 1 sex, 1 gender expression, and 1 gender identity. And they said most people appear somewhere in between male and female on all three of these spectrums. They even say this about sex. They say, well, some people are born intersex. They're born with physical characteristics of both sex.
And then they ask children to identify themselves on that spectrum, don't they? So what do you?
They do.
So what are the choices? What are the choices that the child? How old is the child, and what choices does the child have?
So these are fifth grade students, and if you look at the video of Gender Spectrum's professional development, you'll notice that a lot of the students, when they come up to the sex chart, they will say that their sex is either male or female. And most students are not intersex; they're not born with characteristics, physical characteristics of
they're
both male
doing
and
that
female.
based on biology. Biology is going to determine their first
biological.
The second one then is what they feel.
The second one, so there's gender identity, which they say is the deeply held internal feeling about what gender you are. And what I found remarkable about this portion was that students came up and virtually none of them said just male or just female. They all said that they feel somewhere in the middle. And now that strikes me as just deeply confusing, because what they teach is that essentially there are a lot of different genders, and if you feel somewhere in the middle, then you're probably not male or female. You're probably something else. They don't feed them particular identities, but there certainly are hundreds of these so-called gender identities. You can be a demi-girl, a demi-boy, demisexual.
Are those actual categories that are used?
Not only are those actual categories, but you have major schools, especially these private schools, publishing long lists of accepted gender and sexual identities that include precisely those categories.
This is how we get to what inherently confuses the heck out of me, which is that we have 50 or 60 different genders. I have no idea what that means, that we have 50 or 60 different genders. I mean, I always thought it was 2. I can figure out how you might squeeze in a few more. But how do we get to 50 or 60 different genders? We'll be back in just a few moments. I accomplished a lot in 2020, exposing the truth, establishing the relationship with you, working tirelessly for America. And I came to know the work and value of the people at American Hartford Gold. You see, you buy gold not only for what you know, but you buy gold for what you don't know. American Hartford Gold is the company you can trust when it comes to buying gold. They sell physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or inside of your IRA. In the precious metals industry, they are the highest rated firm in our country with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied clients. Give them a call and tell them Rudy sent you. And be sure to ask them what I bought. And if you call them right now, they will give you up to $1,500 of free silver on your first order. Folks, these are uncertain times. The one thing you can count on to protect what you have worked so hard for is physical gold and silver. So don't wait. Call them now. Call 833-GOLD-777. That's 833-GOLD-777. Or text Rudy to 65532. Again, that's 833-GOLD-777. Or text Rudy to 65532. And now let's get back to our interview.
It is confusing, and one reason it's confusing is because it comes mostly from people posting on Tumblr. Kids post on Tumblr deciding that coining essentially a new gender identity, and then it gets picked up by these activist organizations like Gender Spectrum or like certain major independent schools, and suddenly it's got an institutional stamp of approval. This is problematic, though, because the entire medical establishment in the United States has almost a uniform policy of accepting whatever a child says about their gender. So if they suddenly decide that they are gender non-binary, if they are not male or female, or if a young girl decides that she is now a male, if she identifies as a boy, then children can now go into various medical offices and get puberty blockers and begin to take those,
So
or get testosterone.
So how prevalent is this test in the fifth grade? If I'm doing the calculation correctly, we're talking about 9, 10-year-olds, right? By and large, puberty, right? So we're talking about 9, 10-year-olds who wouldn't generally know much about sex. At least they didn't usually know much about sex. And they're asked, number one, what are you? Are you, I wear a suit, or I wear pants, so I'm a boy, or I'm a girl. Then they're asked, how do you feel, or what your identity is? And you're telling me that most of them put down medium, in between?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them don't put down, most of them don't just follow it with what they appear to be? She looks like a girl, she puts down girl. She looks like a boy, she puts down boy.
That's the really pernicious thing. It's not just confusing for us. I imagine it's confusing for everyone.
Have to be more confusing for the 9-year-old.
Absolutely.
In essence, the 9-year-old who's beginning to develop their notions of who and what they are is now being encouraged to be confused. Particularly if he sees the first 2 or 3 put down. How would they answer that? They would answer in the middle, or unsure, or?
What was striking was one young girl's answer. She said, I was born a girl, but on the inside, I feel in the middle. And I express myself in the middle.
So now she says that, and what you're telling me is that when you say the majority, like 60, 70% or so, put down middle?
So
is that sort of the default answer?
I watched a video of their training. And so this is just one example. But in the video that I watched, I don't think I saw any child put an X next to expression male or expression female, identity male, identity female. They were told sort of the jargon, and they took these adults at their word. They took these adults at their word when they said gender is non-binary. So you're probably somewhere in the middle.
So wait. They're told at the beginning of this. They're almost giving the answer at the beginning. They're told that gender is non-binary.
That is. I mentioned orthodoxy when we first started talking. That is the publicly accepted orthodoxy among these people, and that is the number one message of gender spectrum.
They don't give the children, for example, or maybe they wouldn't be able to do it at that age, but they don't give them a chance to decide whether they agree with that or not.
This is not a college course where you're presented with alternative ideas and figure they'll decide for themselves. No, the way this works is that the children are instructed.
This is why it's evil. Because these children, you really should start with the question, do you agree with it or not? But these children are too young to agree with it or not. Now, if you did this to a maybe 20-year-old, the 20-year-old would probably have something to say about that. Have developed it with their parents and in their life experiences. And do you think gender is binary or non-binary? And then people who feel it's binary just stay out of the game, and people who don't get in it and try to determine what they are. But it's a very, very strange way to make children really, I think, very disturbed and upset.
And not just disturbed and upset. That would be moderate compared to the negative effects of this program. Because, like I said, the medical establishment in the United States is pretty uniform in accepting gender affirmative care for minors. You just said that, well, kids this age probably can't make up their mind. And in a lot of other cases, we say absolutely, children can't make up their mind on important life altering decisions. But when it comes to things like puberty blockers, which can lead later on down the line to infertility, or testosterone, which can permanently change the way a girl looks. It can permanently make a girl, for instance, grow facial hair, or double mastectomies.
So how do you get to that stage? How do you get to that stage, John? So you put down middle, and do you then are you then asked how middle are you? I mean, are you middle and you feel more like a boy or more like a girl, or you're really dead set right in the middle? We'll be back in a few moments. How much equity do you have in your home? 50,000, 100,000, more? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity you have, the greater the chance foreign and domestic criminals will come after you. Title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes. Home Title Lock, America's leader in home title protection, is alerting homeowners they could already be a victim and not know it. Here's how it goes down. First, cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. Next, they pull your home's title that's online. They forge your signature stating you sold your home, and they take out loans using your equity. You're not covered by insurance, your bank, or common identity theft programs. Protect your most valuable asset. Register your address now to see if you're already a victim and receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value free. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. That's HomeTitleLock.com. Time to continue our very, very interesting interview.
So that's where the coherence of this ideology is very much in question. But the main point is that a lot of people either say they identify as the gender that they were not born as. They were born as a girl and they identify as a male, or they say, well, I don't identify with any gender, or I identify with some obscure made up category that I've discovered. And after they do that, they very well might opt to ask people to refer to them by different pronouns. They might then ask people or seek medical care to change the way they look. So they look, perhaps a girl will look more like a boy, or perhaps just they'll look more like nothing. And it's remarkable how this particular ideology encourages children to do that. Once you start referring to yourself as a different gender and start referring to yourself by a different name and start asking everyone else around you to do that, then it becomes a lot more difficult for people to say, or for people to change that, to say, actually, I was wrong. I was 10 years old.
A lot of this began, and you wrote one of your articles, I believe it was the one, it was one of those for the City Journal, about the Professor Kendi.
Yeah, so Ibram X. Kendi
is one of the early writers about this, and his book is almost, I mean, people I think pick it up thinking it's a sort of a moderate, middle of the road book because it's read so often, and it's really quite out there. And he is also called upon to lecture at many of these schools. Does he also conduct programs at them?
So Ibram X. Kendi is probably the best example of the racializing component of this new ideology. Ibram X. Kendi, his basic philosophy is simple. He says that any difference at all in outcomes for different groups is just automatically racism. So if African Americans perform in a different way than white people do, then automatically that is by definition racism. And there are a lot of problems with this sort of policy, or this way of thinking and the policies that result from it. But nevertheless, he's incredibly popular. And he's incredibly popular, especially at very wealthy private schools where he is. His books are assigned for all students. His books are assigned for faculty and staff. And he often is invited at a very high price to come and give public lectures to those students, essentially preaching this ideology.
And there's a woman of almost equal stature. Can you tell us her name? There's a woman of almost equal stature who has also made millions and millions of dollars doing this.
I believe you're referring to Robin DiAngelo.
That's, of course, who I'm referring to. That's right. And she does a similar thing. She goes to schools, school boards, private schools, public schools, and she lectures on a combination of critical race theory, some forms of 1619 Project, and this whole issue of gender. What should we call it? Gender identification, or
gender ideology is what I refer to. And Robin DiAngelo, her main point is this concept of white fragility. The notion that if you even question that you're a racist, that is evidence that you are a racist. It's an evidence that you embody white fragility, which is a trap. That means that nobody can question what she's saying, even if the factual basis of her arguments are very much suspicious.
How many of these people are in fact communists, and how much of this is supported by communist groups?
I can't speak to how many is supported by communist groups, but I can absolutely say that the principles of Marxism, either implicitly or explicitly, are all over this kind of material. Some people are explicitly influenced by Marx, so anyone who advocates for critical race theory, they are working in the lineage of Marx, and they'll straightforwardly say that. There's
Black Lives
no
Matter.
question.
I mean, the only thing I can give them credit for is they are completely unashamed to say they are extremely dedicated extreme Marxists, and actually point out the connections, so you don't have to go make them between critical theory and critical race theory. And Patrice Cullors considers herself both a Marxist scholar and a very effective Marxist activist. Some of the others hide it, but Black Lives Matter, which everyone thinks is primarily about police brutality, really is primarily about gender. It began as a gender group, and they assumed the name Black Lives Matter because of the protests, and it got them a lot of, but if you look at their literature, it's more about gender than race. And they really are a perfect melding of the two.
And once you accept certain premises about what they call intersectionality or about identity, then all of these issues blend together. And I think you're correct to say that they primarily focus on oppression based on identity. And when they focus on that, they absolutely use the paradigm, the language of Marx. There is a direct lineage, and there are also a lot of people who find that kind of speak to be persuasive, and so they catch on and repeat it, whether or not they actually have ever read Marx or think that they're Marxists.
Well, what's the prognosis? Where are we now? Where are we going, and how can we change it?
There are many organizations. So I don't want to be overly optimistic, but when you have plans that totally overhaul a school district or totally overhaul a school and create diversity officers, chief diversity officers, it's very difficult to change the institution. But this is no longer in the dark. People are no longer afraid to speak up against this kind of ideology. And as a result, I think that a lot of people are going to make some significant change surrounding gender. It used to be unquestionable. In the United States, this kind of stuff is still difficult to talk about in the mainstream media, but that is changing. And it has already changed in certain European countries. There's a much a broader level of pushback in places like the UK. In Sweden, they completely stopped all gender affirmative care
So they
for
were
children
ahead
under
of us. I
15.
knew that they were ahead of us in this because I can remember even in the early part of the century going to Europe, and I used to spend a lot of time there, and friends of mine complaining about what, and also I should get in contact with them again, predicting it would happen to us. I mean, I would say, oh, this is the kind of European thing. This is what you've become, broken down old culture. We're the great America. He said, wait, just wait. And they're right. It has spread here now. But the parents now have caught on to it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
you think over a period of time, particularly their work in the school boards, and will tend to reverse this, put a break on it?
That is essentially our charge, our mission. We have to change these things, and that's the work that we're doing at National Association of Scholars. We are providing resources that say, no, this is not how civics ought to be taught. This is not how gender ideology. It should not be spread, and I think a lot of parents are catching on.
Well, I'm going to have you back because we've only covered maybe 10% of this subject, and you really are excellent at this. And may I say that I just personally congratulate you and your organization to see now that we're finally focusing an effort against it. I really congratulate you and thank you. And you're performing maybe one of the most important services that we need to save our way of life. Thank you. And thank your colleagues.
I will, and I really appreciate that. Thanks so much
and
for
stay in contact.
having me on.
If you can educate me more, I certainly will be as helpful as I can. God bless you. Well, I hope you found John's description as interesting as I did, and I'm sure you found it as disturbing as I did. And no reason for me to sum it up very much. I think you got it all. But I think a few things have to be pointed out. What John is describing really goes back quite some time. Oh my goodness, it may go back to the 80s and 90s with the beginning of infiltration of the educational system and the readjustment of history and the attack on our founding fathers and so many things. As I said to John, the whole putting sexuality and gender into the school system goes back at least to the late 1980s with attempts to explain homosexuality and lesbian behavior in a more tolerant way. I mean, there were two sides to that, and all of that seems quite mild now when you look at where we are. But here's the example that I wanted to use, and it comes from an article that was originally written, I believe, for City Journal, which is a publication of that truly remarkable institution, the Manhattan Institute, which does unbelievably great and intellectually honest work for years, and was a big support for the reduction of crime. This was written for the New York Post ultimately, and really created shockwaves just a few weeks ago. So he's describing a particular class that's applying the gender spectrum curriculum to 4th and 5th graders. So this is here's sort of a chart that we're going to use in this. So the teacher begins the lecture, or I guess we would call it for a child, we would call it the teaching lesson. Begins the teaching lesson by basically stating a fact. We remember that gender is not binary, right, children? Well, there's no room here for, I don't know if some say no, but there's not much room for that. That's a given. Gender is not binary. I don't know, for the last 2, 3, 4,000 years, it has been. So if it isn't, this is kind of a big shock to everyone. When I was in school, I think if Sister Marguerite asked this question, the answer would be, "Sister, have you gone crazy?" Yeah, it's like boy, girl. So I'm not saying that this is right or wrong at this point. I'm just saying this is shocking to the sensibilities of people who grew up as late as 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. But the answer now is no discussion. Gender is not binary. Meaning gender is not boy, girl, male, female. Okay, so now that's a given. So then the teacher asks, well, what does that mean? And the student replies dutifully, it means that there aren't just two types of genders. Okay, so this scene comes from something within the Gender Spectrum program, part of their curriculum, and it's called Creating Gender Inclusive Schools. And when I explain this to you, remember, this is being done to fifth graders, and although it's not exactly 100%, I'd assume that we're talking about 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds. We're basically talking about prepubescent children. So what they know and don't know about sex is very debatable. And how much they've been able to think about it and how much they'd be capable of thinking about it in a critical way is highly debatable. I'm sure I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just raising these questions because I know these are questions that are completely overridden here, as is the original question about whether gender is binary or not, which I don't know that that's a settled issue. Then the student is asked, in this case it was a female student, was asked to come up to the board and was given three spectrums, they're called spectrums, which were put on the whiteboard and labeled biology, expression, and identity. Now, what does that mean? It means how you were born, how you express yourself now, and how do you feel on the inside about your gender. And the girl answered this particular girl answered as follows. My biology, I was born as a girl. Okay, we got that set. How do you express yourself? I express myself in the middle. And then, what's your identity? How do you feel on the inside? Middle. So you got it, right? Now, children come up now, all of them come up. And based on at least this program and several others that were observed by John, the large majority of answers are what you see on the board. Not girl, I guess an equal number of girls and boys, depending on the school. But this answer may change, and this answer is binary, boy, girl, right? Unless we've invented something I haven't heard of. That would really be shocking, but who knows? But generally, this answer gets answered, girl, boy. And now we get to expression, and the majority of answers are middle. And then the majority of answers here are middle. And I would have thought for sure that this would be a minority of answers when you consider that I've always labored under the impression, all through the development of dealing with sexuality and the sexual revolution, I've always thought of homosexuality and lesbianism and that as about 10% of the population. And I know the estimates for transgender are about 10% of the population. I assume that 10% overlaps to some extent. So I don't know what it would be. I don't think it'd be a full 20%. Probably, let's just say, for argument's sake, it's about 15%. So you'd expect, if this is all, determined by genes and what's inside you, and you have no choice about this, which has been a very, very strong argument about why homophobia is wrong and all those other forms of bias. So if you assume that it's about 15, even 20%, then you'd expect that here, most of your answers, 80% of your answers, even if you grant another 10% for confusion, would be boy or girl. But no, most of the answers are middle. And then over here, how do you feel inside? Middle. You'd expect this to be no more than 20 to 30%. the actual number that genetically are and those that might be in some state of legitimate confusion about it. So how do we end up with 60, 70, I don't know how many percent, he wasn't exactly able to get the exact number, but he just said the most people answer it this way. This happens because of suggestion, doesn't it? Well, you know what children are like, and children are not terribly different than adults. I mean, you saw during the pandemic when they closed the churches, instead of objecting, all the very religious people just went along like sheep, right? People basically follow us. They follow the leader, and they follow the default position when it's set up. When the first 3 kids get up there, male or female, and put middle down, 80% of the class can put down middle, because that's the cool thing to be. And if you're middle here, on the inside, you're middle. Now, this is very, very dangerous. I don't think I have to emphasize why it's dangerous, and I'm not. I'm going to have you think about it, because everybody's going to have different reasons. But I can tell you, in part, in addition to the Black Lives Matter and the critical race theory and teaching children that all whites are racist and that America is a terrible country and that we were founded in slavery and that Christopher Columbus is some kind of a horrible human being and Jefferson is not much better, and Jefferson's statue had to be taken down from City Hall in New York, and we've taken down Abraham Lincoln's statue, we've taken down Theodore Roosevelt's statue. Gosh almighty, we've taken down Frederick Douglass's statue. He wasn't for abolition enough, I guess. This is a systematic effort to destroy, for the American child, the love of America. America's a hateful place. And the respect and inculcation of our traditional values that have been many century-long values that civilized human beings have held. And they're being thrown away without analysis, without discussion. Remember, how does it begin? Well, we know that gender is not binary. Let's begin with that. Right, kids? Wow. And if we don't know that, what we get canceled? Nobody talks to us in school. I've represented some kids like that. One kid who got caught holding a Reagan sign and got tortured for it in a DC school. This is prevalent very, very much in DC. This is prevalent in New York. It's in the rich private schools where a lot of the parents don't know it, but a lot of the teachers are, left-wing chowderheads. That was an old expression. And it's taught in the public schools, much more than you think. And this is where we're going, unless we stop it. And this is the emotion and the rationale behind the parents being so upset about what the school boards and the schools and the private have been doing to their children, indoctrinating them behind their back, making a large percentage of children who have no genetic propensity to being trans question it. This should never be more than 20, 30% at best. And you cannot escape the power of suggestion of peers for children, particularly 9 and 10 years old. This should result in a prosecution of gender spectrum for child abuse, and for the teachers, and for the school boards. If we had prosecutors and we had a government with any courage who wanted to protect our children. Let's see if we do. But don't stop. Don't be intimidated by fascist actions like those of, I don't even call him Attorney General. What the heck is he? Commissar of the Biden enforcement program? That's our Attorney General. Once a judge, now a fascist. He's going to prosecute under federal crimes people going to school board meetings and making disruptions. He can make that up. This is where we are. But you got to know it. You got to understand it. You got to understand how bad it is. And when you see these parents very upset, you just think if your child came home and said, "Mom, Dad, today I was told that gender isn't binary. I didn't even know what that meant, but all the kids said, that's right. So I said, that's right. Then Mary Jane, my best friend, and Susie, the prettiest girl in class, and Joni, the meanest one in class, got up, and they all said that they were in the middle here. So I don't even, I just put that down. I don't want to get canceled by the mean girls, you know. This is pernicious. This is why I need you. Stay with me, huh? Stay with rudyscommonsense.com. We're going to fight all this. We're going to beat them. You know why? Real simple. We're right and they're wrong. Our system of government is the greatest in the history of the world. Our way of life is the greatest in the history of the world, with all of its flaws, because we correct them. And what they are operating on is a Marxist, Leninist playbook. Word for word, chapter for chapter, step by step. Destroy schools, destroy the parents, just take God out, and then we got them. And centralize power as much as possible. And isn't that what they're also doing? So to combat it, you got to know it. To know it, you got to get around the censorship. I'm going to help you with that, and so a lot of other people. So stay tuned for the next episode of Rudy's Common Sense. You know where to get it, on rudyscommonsense.com. Just hit subscribe and you'll be notified, and we'll keep up with them, and we won't let them get an inch on us. Thank you, and God bless America.